Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War, and I'm passing through Lexington, Virginia today, and every time I do I try to stop and pay my respects to General Stonewall Jackson and carry on a tradition that my daughter and I started years ago when she was just a wee little 5-year-old. She is now 25, almost 26, not that I'm telling her age on her, so it's been a long family tradition, and that is to take a lemon and add it to the collection already scattered here in front of Jackson's grave. So I'll give that a little pitch. There it is. Jackson, of course, one of the myths of Jackson is that he loved to have lemons, and so that's where this comes from. And as you'll be able to see here, many other people have laid lemons down there as well. Whether Jackson or not actually loved lemons, we don't really know. There are only 2 counts that were published during the wartime that suggest that he or witnessed him eating lemons, but he liked fresh fruit of all sorts, so what's to say he wouldn't like lemons? But it is something unusual, and so that makes him stand out to us, the lemon-sucking general, as Colonel Keith Gibson of VMI once said he told his kids, and that was something that grabbed his kids' attention and imagination and made them pay attention and want to learn more. I know it probably seems a little weird to be showing up at the grave of a dead Confederate general and throwing fruit at the foot of the pedestal. Let me turn the camera around here just for a second so we can look at some of those lemons a little more up close. Some of them look like they've been there for a while before they've been replaced, but there are a dozen lemons that are out here on the grass. This is sort of a popular way people tend to remember Jackson. Again, whether the lemon myth is true or not is sort of beside the point. Jackson himself buried here along with members of his family. If I zoom up, we'll take a look at the statue, and let me zoom out just a little bit. This was sculpted by Edward Valentine and dedicated here in Lexington on July 21st, 1891, the 30th anniversary of the Battle of First Manassas, when Stonewall got his first nickname. I love this statue. He's just sort of looking off into the distance, and as legend has it, he was placed this way because he said he would never turn his back on the South, so that's why he's looking southward. Jackson's buried here in Lexington because this was where he lived prior to the war. Obviously, he worked at the Virginia Military Institute as a professor. He was married twice here. His first wife died. She's buried in the cemetery. His second wife had a daughter who died after 3 weeks. Jackson, his first wife died in childbirth, so he had a lot of tragedy here as well as a lot of happiness. And those are the sorts of things that really attracted me to him as an individual, kind of getting beyond the bronze figure, the marble man that we think of, and really looking at this guy as a human being. And there are many things to kind of peel back. And so coming to Lexington is always an opportunity to really get a look at that rich personal life of Jackson, so we can see him as a person and not as a military hero, and then only then looking at him as a military hero through that lens of his humanity. I have a very personal connection to Jackson because he's my way into the war. When Stephanie, my daughter, was a 4-year-old, she fell in love with a guy, and so we started learning about Jackson, and it was because of that connection that I started to learn more and more about the war. And I discovered that Jackson had some things that were admirable, things I still respect and admire. He isn't anybody I want to sit around and have a beer with, but he is someone that I think we can learn from. That's something I mentioned in the latest editor's letter in the ECW newsletter, is that we often rush to judgment or have stereotyped many commanders on both sides of the Civil War, but it's really worth our while to take a second look at these men and see what can we learn from them rather than just judge them one way or another. And I don't mean just because they fought for the North or the South. The example I used in the newsletter was Ambrose Burnside, and we tend to kind of dismiss him as a buffoon. But there are some things we can learn if we set aside our rush to judgment and really kind of take a look at their lives in the context of their times and see what there is. I've spent a lot of time writing about Jackson, studying Jackson. I'm really invested in his personal story. And he's somebody that I think that all of us can take a look at and see some things to admire and see some things that we can probably learn from, things that we probably would do a little differently today. But that's not to say that in his time, he didn't make some decisions that he thought we're well grounded. And so try to understand that thought process is how we can learn. Again, not passing judgment, not defending, not criticizing, but just trying to learn. Jackson is someone, as I said, I've spent a lot of time with. So that's why I like to come here and pay my respects. Ultimately, I think that that's one of the values of studying the Civil War, is figuring out what can we learn, how can we carry on the memory, how can we pass on these stories, learn from them, so that as we move forward as educated citizens today, we're able to learn the lessons from the past, benefit from the wisdom it shares for us, so that we can then apply that moving forward. So that's what brings me here to the foot of Stonewall Jackson, here at the Stonewall Jackson Cemetery in Lexington, gesturing and moving my selfie stick. I don't seem to have all that very organized, do I? But so glad to have you with me. I'm Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War.